Are you a healthcare professional looking for a trusted concussion resource? Then you've come to the right place. From her New York City studios, welcome to Concussion Corner with your host, Dr. Jessica Schwartz.
Welcome to the Concussion Corner podcast. My name is Dr. Jessica Schwartz, and today's episode is dedicated to all of our athletic trainers out there for the National Athletic Training Month of March. I'm thrilled to have Dustin Fink, one of the strongest names in athletic training in the world of concussion. Dustin Fink has been an on-field athletic trainer, so an active athletic trainer for those of you who aren't familiar with that role, for 17 years as a professional and another 5 as a student athletic trainer. He obtained his bachelor's degree from Colorado State Pueblo and received his master's from Colorado State University, Fort Collins. After working as an athletic trainer in the high school setting over the first 7 years, he began looking further into concussions. Mainly things weren't adding up with the concussed kids he was seeing. During this time, Dustin created the Concussion Blog with the goal of providing a source of unbiased information regarding concussions and their management. Over the past 10 years, he has devoted nearly 7,000 hours of research since September of 2010. When the Concussion Blog went live, he has generated over 1.5 million site visits from nearly every country in the world. Dustin, welcome to the Concussion Corner podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jessica. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you, and I'm pumped to represent you for Athletic Training Month. How's you guys doing anything at your school for this month?
No, I'm just living the dream, doing my job, and trying to be the best athletic trainer I can. Actually, the cool thing is my oldest son is now old enough where he's participating in junior high track and field, which kind of overlaps with my job duties. So I get to see my first child in that setting, and it's kind of interesting.
Interesting, hopefully in a good way.
I hope so, yes.
Indeed. So, Dustin, we're just going to kick this off here. I'm sure you're going to be a frequent guest on this podcast, but I try to keep every podcast for about 30 minutes in time. We really have only meaningful attention for 20 or 30 anyway. So I'd like to kick it off with your first podcast here on Concussion Corner with essentially why. Like, why did you get into athletic training, and what was your trajectory of how you ended up in the concussion world?
Sure. So why did I get into athletic training? Well, basically, it became a necessity because I essentially was told by my parents growing up, if I had any part of athletics growing up, I didn't have to pay for a car, didn't have to pay for gas, didn't have to pay for insurance, and that fun stuff. And, well, I got cut from basketball all 4 years because apparently I'm not a very good basketball player. But I had to find a way to stay in athletics. And at the time, I had a wonderful, now looking back, great mentor, John Lee. Was my athletic trainer in high school, and he allowed me to come on as a student athletic trainer, and that's kind of why I started. I was able to go to college and play some college baseball, or was invited to play college baseball in my undergrad. That lasted all of a semester when I found out that baseball was supposed to take a priority over the rest of my career and life, and I wasn't that good at baseball. So I made the decision to switch over to athletic training exclusively in college, and that's kind of where I got started and why I got started, and I'm now basically 22, 23 years into that role as an athletic trainer, either as a student athletic trainer or a credentialed athletic trainer, and I couldn't ask for anything better.
Indeed, and when in your career as a certified athletic trainer, and we'll talk a little bit about certification as well on this podcast, but when did the concussionblog.com basically start? How did it come to fruition? Was it out of a need or frustration? How did this start for you?
Sure. So the Concussion Blog came about as more of, like, as you said, a necessity and a need for me. I was confused as to how much information was being disseminated in terms of up-to-the-minute information on concussion. I had heard plenty in the background, but never seen anything in the foreground. And I thought maybe if I created a blog and started aggregating information in one spot, I could find it for later to help other people. It kind of took off after that and became a bunch of different things for me in terms of concussion education. And it became a cathartic type of place for me to deal with my own concussions and how I have dealt with them in the future. So it came about in about 2008. That's when it started. And I think I launched it in 2009 or late 2008. I totally forget the date now. And then it took off on like wildfire. And then since then I contributed to it. I had a couple writers over the years that it was there, and really used it more as a platform to make sure everybody had as much awareness about what we know about concussions and everything else that goes along with it as much as possible.
Indeed, and that all lines up in terms of timing, right? So we've had Dr. Bill Barr on this podcast. He's a world-renowned neuropsychologist, and quite frankly, he's the neuropsychologist that essentially, for lack of better words here, blew up the NFL when he saw 20%, about 20% of his data, of his work, his PhD work as a neuropsychologist being presented by the NFL in 2008 on ESPN. And he was like, oh, this is great. And then he was like, wait, they cherry-picked my data. This is incorrect. And that was the NFL concussion crisis when that all began with Alan Schwartz in the New York Times. So, the fact that you were literally in the middle of that media crisis and this unknown with the NFL and what was going on there completely lines up with your 2008-2009 interest in this area.
Yeah, and it's interesting how all that kind of ties together, because I wasn't necessarily looking for anybody in particular, but I would read stuff from Alan Schwartz. I would hear stuff from the NFL about concussions, and then I would see stuff that's coming out of consensus statements out of Berlin, or I think back then it was pre-Zurich, so I forget exactly where they were, Prague I think it was, and information coming out of that time, and it just... To me, it was exactly all of that. It's all this information, but nobody had it. So I thought, hey, let's put it all in one spot, at least for me and my athletic trainers that I work with, and we can use it as a resource. And then what it became after that was just kind of an animal in and of itself.
Indeed. And, our first two episodes on this podcast, I had Jeff Kutcher on, a physician, a tremendous physician in this world in Michigan. And, he really started the first sports fellowship, sports neurology fellowship in the United States here where we're based in the early mid-2000s. So all of this kind of happened pretty quickly within the 5 to 10 years. And in the last 5 years from now, in 2018, the last 5 years, the data has exponentially grown. And it's fascinating to connect to kind of your world. And I just got back from the Super Bowl not too long ago. I was moderating an event out there, and I handled that with a kit glove. I was part of a panel for the Lee Steinberg event. And quite frankly, Dave Duerson's wife was on that panel, Alicia Duerson, and she's a wonderful woman. And Dave's son and Alicia's son, Treg, are alive and well. And, for our audience, Dave Duerson took his life. He shot himself directly in the heart to donate his brain. And, we need to have access for our players, our athletes, our patients. And, Dave did the right thing. Dave went to the clinicians that he was supposed to go to, but his clinicians did not have training, which led him to this unfortunate trajectory of committing suicide. And we will talk about suicide and PTSD, and we're going to get comfortable with getting uncomfortable with those topics on this podcast. But, you're absolutely right, and you were way ahead of the curve by doing this, Dustin. So I really, bravo to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, as we go on here, we know that athletic trainers are, the pulse of athletics. You guys do some tremendous work. You are an allied health care profession. You're recognized by the American Medical Associations and Health Resources Services Administrations and the Department of Health and Human Services. I would wonder if you can explain kind of to the audience what an athletic trainer is, what your roles and responsibilities are, and kind of how the importance of your role for our kids and our youth athletes and our professional athletes.
Absolutely. So the athletic trainer, a lot of times people look on the sideline and see us maybe standing there not doing anything, or maybe handling the water bottles or doing stuff like that. That's just a very small percentage of what we do. In fact, a lot of the stuff we do is behind the scenes. There are 5 major domains of athletic training that we strive and we get educated about, we strive for. And the number one thing is prevention of athletic injury. So a lot of the stuff we do as an athletic trainer is preventing injuries and preventing issues that may arise. If we can prevent injuries, then that's a lot less work on the back end, plus that's less missed time for athletes and whatnot. But the other areas that we specialize in, the other domains that we get educated in are evaluation and diagnosis, although we don't technically diagnose, but we do evaluation to try and figure out what the issue is, sending people to the right places to get the right care, especially when it comes to concussion. The next area we talk about is treatment / rehabilitation / reconditioning / conditioning for prevention. Then we do emergency care, emergency management of injury. And then we also get into the area of education / professional development and organizational structure. So those are the areas in which we're trained and what we do. We're interdisciplinary. I feel like the athletic trainer, I've heard it, Dr. Andrews say it a few times, the athletic trainer is the glue of the sports medicine team, which might be true. It might be slapping ourselves on the back a little bit too much, but honestly, we do a lot of work. We do a lot of the grunt work between parent and athlete and physical therapist or chiropractor and doctor. We interpret the notes from the doctor, and then the doctor's sending notes to a physical therapist, and then physical therapist sending a note back with the kid about what they can do at the schools or in terms of rehabilitation on the field. And we're kind of interpreting and working with all of that. So the athletic trainer is kind of the middleman. For the longest time, we have not wanted to be in the spotlight, I guess, as a profession, but I think that's changing. We felt we've been in the shadows, so to speak, for a long period of time, and now we're kind of getting our legs, becoming an athletic trainer and doing athletic trainer things. We want to be recognized for what we do. So I feel like we don't really try to impede on anybody, and I think we go with what Dr. Andrews said, and we're the glue. We try and keep everybody on the same page and rowing the boat in the same direction.
Indeed. I was an exercise science major. I didn't go the athletic training route at Ithaca College when I was an undergrad, but we basically had 3/4 of the same classes as you guys, and then you guys obviously transitioned over into some of that more specialty training for ATCs. And, I have to say some of my best friends are athletic trainers, and I will say you guys are some of the most underpaid, overworked professionals in any healthcare or any job that I know. You guys are pulling hours and days and nights and traveling, unlike any other healthcare provider that I'm aware of, and really thank you for your service as an AT.
That's nice of you, and I'm glad you recognize that, because there are a lot of us that do that. And we spread not only in what our traditional settings, but talk about the military and the industrial setting where athletic trainers are being utilized and used very well. Also putting in the insane hours and the insane time to make sure everybody stays healthy, trying to prevent the best we can and keeping people functional in a safe manner.
Indeed. And, are there any in your area? I know I'm just going to have you speak for your area, and you're in the Illinois area, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, for those of you that are outside of the states, that's kind of like Chicago. So that's the state where Chicago lives. I know everything.
Well, there's Chicago, and then there's the rest of the state. And apparently, if you don't live in Chicago, it's all downstate. But we're actually in the middle of the state. We're not in southern Illinois, although people in Chicago would say I live in southern Illinois. But no, yes, I am in Illinois.
Yes, and I live in New York City, and everyone kind of knows New York City, and they don't realize how beautiful a state we have in New York, actually. But we have folks listening. I just checked our stats this morning. We have folks from Thailand and Italy and the Netherlands and Ireland and Australia, New Zealand, Canada. We've got folks all over, and it's just the first 30 days. So it's been such an honor to just see this thing kind of travel literally around the world, because this conversation needs to be had. But I'm looking at a semi-old article from the HuffPost from some National Athletic Training Association stats, and the stats in the U.S. are ridiculous. First of all, the stats that I'm aware of as of, I want to say February 2017 that I'm aware of, and again, don't quote me here, but I'm pretty sure I'm in New York City, so we have the largest public school system in the country. So we have 1.1 million students that we care for in public education. That doesn't include charter schools or private schools in the 5 boroughs of New York City. We are more than Manhattan. So we had, I believe, eight athletic trainers for all of what we do here. I know we're working on changing that, but that obviously is completely unacceptable. According to the NITA in 2014 stats, only 55% of athletes at public secondary schools have access to a full-time athletic trainer. I'm just going to repeat that because I think that's pretty jaw-dropping in my world. Only 55% of athletes at public secondary schools have access to a full-time athletic trainer. And we'll talk about what that means in a second, Dustin. And according to the NITA, just 37% of public secondary schools have one. So, again, I mean, these stats I know you're aware of, but what are your thoughts there when you just hear that?
Well, when we talk about like healthcare, right? So the national topic about healthcare, which is a hot button topic, no matter who you are, access, whether you're getting proper care and treatment. If we're so worried about that, especially with our youth, and especially those that are probably the most vulnerable, the youth that are in athletics are being exposed to risk. If we don't have somebody there to help them, I think that's a problem, right? So one of my very good friends, Mike Hopper, athletic trainer down in Texas now, he said it right. Like, would you ever drop your kid off at a pool without a lifeguard or an adult supervision? No, you wouldn't. And even if there was adult supervision, wouldn't you feel much safer with a lifeguard, somebody that's trained in emergency type situations? Of course you would. Now, that's not belittling the athletic training profession. It's trying to make a point that if you're going to drop your kids off at soccer or you're going to drop them off at lacrosse, wouldn't you like to have a medical professional there on hand in case something were to happen? You know, if they rolled an ankle or they got hit with a ball and it's maybe we're worried about a contusion or a fracture. Wouldn't you like somebody to take a look at that? So if you have 30%, 37% of schools that have an athletic trainer, that means there's 63% of schools that don't have that. And that's kind of alarming, really, if we're talking about on the national scene about protection and healthcare.
Indeed. And then we're going to talk about, and I laugh not in jest, but we're also going to talk about that kids aren't playing just one sport. So kids are playing club sports, and kids are playing AAU, and kids are playing travel, and kids are playing whatever they're playing with their church team. And that doesn't include those numbers. So
that's correct. That is one thing that people don't realize is you have millions of kids playing high school and you have exposure to high school. But what about in the summer when there is no high school? They're playing, like you said, the club sports or the rec sports and stuff like that. Very few athletic trainers are part of this type of AAU system or travel leagues or anything like that. So just think about that for a second. And we're not even talking, we're only talking about high school, secondary schools. We're not talking about, like my son's junior high, he's 6th grade. He's lucky enough that he's in a district where the athletic trainer does cover that stuff. But no, there's not many that are like that. And so we're talking about, we're leaving kids exposed to, they're going to be injured whether I'm standing on the sideline or not, but maybe they're leading the kids and their families exposed to incidental care that they may not need. Maybe they don't have the money to go run to the emergency room if Johnny gets a little bump on the shoulder. Whereas the athletic trainer is already looking at, say, hey, you know what? Let's give this a couple days. Maybe it's just a contusion. All my tests indicate that it's possibly not a fracture. Let's just see how it reacts, instead of immediately running off to the emergency room and incurring a cost that we may or may not can afford. So, yes, that is massive. You are right. Exactly right.
Yeah, so, and we can talk about periodization and things like that at a different time, but, for our listeners, just to kind of connect to, if you're not into athletics or if your kids or yourself, you didn't grow up with athletics, a big thing here to connect to is that professional athletes have periodization, and that means rest. And our kids, our professional athletes, our weekend warriors, our pros rest. So they take a season off. They're still conditioning. They're cross-training, doing something else, horseback riding, cycling, crossfitting, whatever they're doing. But for whatever reason, our parents think that, our parents, I should say, not ours, but I was also a kid that was overworked. And Brian Hainline, the chief medical officer of the NCAA, said this so beautifully. He was like, our kids are arriving to us already damaged. And I think that's such an important thing to connect to. So, we should have rest. We should have, we don't have to play 4 seasons of soccer, spring, fall, winter, travel league, indoor. and things like that. If you talk to a Taylor Twellman or you talk to some of the best NFL players or soccer players or any pro athlete, many of them will tell you they didn't specialize when they grew up. What are you seeing in your community?
Starting to see a little bit of specialization. I am, if you follow me on the Concussion Blog or if you follow me on Twitter at Concussion Blog, you will see that I'm very outspoken. I'm very outspoken in my community too when it comes to issues like this. There are some specialization things, but you're right, there is no periodization. There is no quote unquote rest for the athletes. And that dovetails and segues quite nicely into why I'm here at the Concussion Corner, right? Mm-hmm. Rest, we're in such a hurry to get back to what we're doing. We're overlooking the proper way of dealing with an injury, let alone concussion. It's not a hurry up and get back type situation like we used to think. It is now a situation, whether it's general athletics and sleep, or if it's dealing with concussion on a football field, we've got to wait. We have to allow rest and recovery.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Now, in terms of concussion, Dustin, thinking back in the day, go back to school, what was your training? Was it a textbook? Was it on the field exposure? Like, what was your training back in the day in concussion? Because again, like nobody had it. So,
right.
But the athletic trainers were definitely exposed to it more than most professionals because you guys are on field.
Game, supposedly. Yeah, absolutely. Supposedly we were ahead of the game, and we may or may not have been. But back in the day, it was what we called the Cantu system after Dr. Robert Cantu. Came out in the 80s with a closed head injury or concussion type protocol, and that's what we were trained with. If somebody sustained a closed traumatic brain injury, mild traumatic brain injury, or something we called concussion back then, where it was transient in nature, and they didn't exhibit anything like loss of consciousness, even if they just exhibited some stumbling and slurring of words, that was considered okay back in the day. Mm-hmm. We'd ask the athlete if they were okay 15 minutes later, and the athlete told us they were okay. Go ahead and go back in. You're okay. Like, that's the way it was trained. And I know that sounds absolutely asinine compared to what we know today, but that's how we were trained. That's exactly how we were trained. If doubt, they were done. But if they wobbled around and came on the sideline, my head hurts. Well, I came back to you and asked you 15 minutes later, you're fine, and you said yes, then you just went back in. So were we ahead of the game? Maybe in recognizing what this was all about, but in terms of treatment, we were doing a massive disservice now that we've come to find out.
Indeed. And this is the conversation across the board for everybody. This is not just athletic trainers or physicians or physios. This is everybody. For our listeners that are keying in, 2012, let's go back to 2008. 2008, we were actually discussing, we actually rest our athletes and our people until all symptoms abate, which we now know is a harmful thing. And we don't do that. We wait 24 to 72 hours. That's a systematic review done by Grant Iverson and Noah Silverberg. And we rehabilitate this early. We get them moving early with a low-load cardiovascular activity, whether it be walking, depending on their vestibular symptoms, and that's a different podcast than this. In 2012, we just started talking about the neck, that stick that holds the head up, and all those afferent and efferent pathways go back to the rest of the body. I mean, the brain is a single child, and it really controls everything that we do autonomically, cognitively, physiologically, and so on. And 2017, quite frankly, was the first year that those of us that have been in rehabilitation and have been rehabilitating moderate and severe TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, know that this is a rehabilitative injury. But 2017 in Berlin in 2016, and the paper was published in 2017 in the spring with BJSM, which we'll put in the show notes for you. But that was the first year that we called this injury a rehabilitative injury. And we know that rehabilitating this injury is key, doing comprehensive targeted physical exams. Going on that with that threshold, Dustin, what has been, I know you guys have to maintain CEUs and things like that, what has been your continuing education with this injury from obviously the Bob Cantu days from back in the day in the early 2000s to today?
I gobbled up everything I could find on concussion. I just became wildly interested in it because I've had quite a few myself. I think I'm up to 14 now. We document those because I'm part of the Brain Bank and the donation of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. And so I became immersed, and this is all about the time I started the blog. I became immersed in any continuing education I could get my hands on. And to be honest with you, it was rapidly changing. And it still is to an extent. But what's beautiful is, as I've progressed over time in terms of continuing education, a lot of this stuff is starting to be consistent across the board. It was beautifully brought together during my EIM training with concussion, led by you, which I appreciate you for inviting me on board for that. I know you probably weren't expecting a plug there, but I really appreciate what it is. It's brought me on to more things that make sense, and more things are more applicable as an athletic trainer. I mean, for the longest time, the continuing education that I had to do might have been great in terms of information, but in terms of application, it wasn't good. I'd like to always, opine on my blog saying the people in the lab coats and the white ivory towers would come up with these great ideas of continuing education on how to deal with concussion, but us boots on the ground, it just never worked. What I found out through the IM training and stuff that I took with you, and especially Dr. Furtado, there are pieces that you can take, and those continuing education classes that are out now, we've understood that we can take pieces from all these nice ideas and apply them, and it's helpful across the spectrum for all people and all practitioners that deal with concussion.
Indeed. I invented the Evidence in Motion EIM concussion management certification based off my own injury. And essentially, I identified some of the cognitive blind spots in healthcare. And, really the whole premise of the EIM program, which is year-long, post-professional, and interdisciplinary, which is why we have physicians to athletic trainers, physios, occupational therapists. We have some service members in there that are healthcare providers that are actually changing the way in which they serve our military servicemen and women, which has just been a humbling journey that still gives me goosebumps. But, the essential premise is, here's what I can do for the patient or the athlete, here's what you can do for the patient or athlete, and here's how we can train together. And here's how we can treat this patient, I should say, together. And I have to say, Dustin really held his ground. Dustin, I know you had some tough times, but you really held your ground so beautifully, because this was stuff that was, I don't want to say over your head, but you didn't have any initial training in. And you, in the tough neuro stuff, the tough orthopedic, you really held your ground, and I know you put your, boots to the ground and really, nailed it. So really impressive, because you are right now the only sole athletic trainer we've had. We've had a lot of PT ATC combos, but we haven't had sole ATCs come in since you. So you really did a wonderful job, and I know you're serving your community wonderfully.
Well, if there's any athletic trainers that are listening to this, which I hope there are a few, you need to think about investing in it. And Jessica is right. It was tough. And we talked about continuing education, and we're learning more and more to be cross-disciplinary with the education, which is so wonderful for not only my profession, but everybody's profession. And yes, at times it felt like I was swimming uphill in muddy water that was frozen. I was able to get through it, not only because of my background, but because of the teaching style and of the cohort of peers that I had. So from continuing education, as an athletic trainer, it's changed, and I've taken a lot over the years. It started with just barely kind of all over the place stuff, and it's now kind of narrowed down into the most recent as cross-disciplinary information with concussions, specifically concussions. And I'll tell you what, the EIM training I got through you and what you put out there was wonderful. And if there's any athletic trainers listening out there that want information in concussions in terms of evaluation, in terms of treatment, just in terms of cross-disciplinary discussions, in terms of messaging, in terms of anything when it comes to concussion, this is something that you need to do. It has been eye-opening over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of what we've come across in concussion, in continuing education with concussion, how we've gone from the Bob Cantu days to where we are today, to where we went from cocoon therapy to rest until all symptoms are gone that we talked about, to walking, to the buffalo treadmill. The spectrum is unbelievable, and it's something that really hits home in terms of an athletic trainer because of all the hours we have to get. We got to get 50 every 2 years. This is something that's not going away, and it's something that we need to devote our attention to.
Indeed, and when you were in there and you were our first cohort of 6, and we have over 50 now, we actually didn't have John Letty, we didn't have Lenore Herget, and you were actually going to get access to that at some point in the next few months, if not weeks. But yeah, they've been doing wonderful work for us, and so John Letty actually will take you through the Buffalo concussion treadmill test that he invented. So we try to really get folks in that invent the things, and then we bring them in, because why not? It's 2018, we need to be able to learn with distance learning and very Khan Academy-esque.
And let's not fool anybody, Jessica. It was difficult for me for a time there. You know that very well. I mean, athletic trainers, we have a great background and we're diverse in what we do, but the depth and breadth by which you created Dr. Furtado and everybody else brought in, it took some time and it took some effort. But I'm telling you what, it's well worth that effort.
Yeah, I think I only had to talk you off the ledge once, so I think you really held your ground. You had to get through the Tad Seifert neuro and the Michael Furtado neuro vestibular stuff, and you really did wonderful. As we have a few minutes left, I'd love for you to highlight some stuff about Athletic Training Month, what some hashtags are that are popular out there, and we'll talk about how to get in contact with you, and I'm sure we'll bring you on for many more of these.
Sure, certainly. So Athletic Training Month is basically about awareness of what athletic trainers do. And so this podcast is definitely one thing that is tremendous. There's tons of hashtags and different things you can do out there. Our hashtag is hashtag NATM 2018, National Athletic Trainers Month 2018. And our motto this year is compassionate care for all, because we want people to understand, although we are tagged with athletic trainer, and people tend to think of us with athletes, there are many different types of athletes. There's the weekend warrior athlete. There's the military athlete. There's the industrial athlete. And then there's the traditional athlete. There's a youth athlete. There's the adolescent athlete. There's a professional athlete. There's all over the place. And we are in all of those places. So we're trying to highlight, as athletic trainers, that we're across the spectrum. And the other thing we like to try to highlight is that we're willing to work and we want to work with all professions, whether it be physical therapy or whether it be doctor or whether it be chiropractor. We want to work together because we want, again, everybody is treated in the best manner possible. So that's kind of what we're highlighting this month and this year and this go around. We just want to make sure everybody understands that as athletic trainers, we do more than tape an ankle or hand water to somebody. There's so much more that we do behind the scenes. Jessica is one of our greatest allies, and you've got friends, and you hear me, and we text and we direct message all the time about certain things. You're well aware. So if you guys could spend an extra time or extra few minutes this month, find an athletic trainer, ask them maybe a couple simple questions, as simple as, what is your greatest moment in athletic training? What is something you hope to do in 5 years in athletic training that'll make lives better? And see what they say to that.
Indeed. And, I do challenge our listeners, if you guys are unaware of what an athletic trainer is, and maybe you just learned what one is now, and you are a physician or a psychologist or social worker, we've got folks listening from literally all fields of medicine. Think about, if you have kids, think about hey, did you just drop $500 on super cool jerseys and Under Armour for your 6-year-old? I don't mean to laugh there, but, think about, hey, well, maybe I don't have an athletic trainer. Maybe we can start a fund and donate $25, $50 to start getting athletic trainers at sites that are trained in concussion and trained in so much more, especially in months like August, where we have the greatest cardiovascular deaths and heat stroke and other issues musculoskeletally and so on, for our youth athletes. So I challenge the parents out there to think differently. I challenge the clinicians out there that are parents to maybe, advocate for athletic training in your community, your school, your club, whatever it is, because the role of the ATC is just so important. So again, Dustin, thank you so much for your service. Where can folks find you on social media and your website?
Sure, absolutely. The website is theconcussionblog.com. I don't write on that much anymore, but as we were talking pre-show here, our pre-show meeting, I wrote a lot of that stuff 8 to 10 years ago, and it still stands the test of time, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And so please go there for resource. We got good resources about sleeping and recovery. We got good resources about where you can find information, talk about neurocognitive testing. We talk about computer testing, baseline testing, all sorts of stuff. It's a good, I still feel like it's a good resource if you want information about concussions, especially things like, I can opine about like the so-called mild concussion. You can find information there. I can be found most directly, and you can interact with me quite often on Twitter. I find 280 much easier to get done with 3 kids in a busy life. You can find me at Concussion Blog on Twitter, and give me a shout out and ask me any question. I usually get back to everybody.
Yeah, he does a really good job there, I have to say. And again, you guys have heard this before. I'll say it again. We do this because we love it. We do this because we don't make a lot of money for it. We're not, buying homes and fancy cars. We do this because we love it, and we are concerned about taking care of the welfare of others. So, please, if it's like 1, 2, 3 days, even a week or so, just give us some time to get back to you, and we do our absolute best. So, Dustin, thank you so much for coming on to Concussion Corner, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. And again, to our listeners, please use him as a resource. He's a tremendous ally for all athletic trainers out there, and really has been cutting edge, since the early mid-2000s. So Dustin, thanks for your service.
Jessica, thank you for having me. Thanks for bringing me on here to promote a National Athletic Trainer Month and athletic trainers. And thank you for being an ally. And I look forward to our future conversations when we can drill down and I can give you my unique and outspoken perspective on certain things within the concussion realm.
Yes, and I know we're going to definitely take it there, and I know our listeners know what that means, know that we'll take it there as well. So we'll make sure to do that for our listeners as a service, and we'll have you on soon.
All right, thanks, Jessica.
Thank you for listening to the Concussion Corner, hosted by Dr. Jessica Schwartz. The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not to be used as personal medical advice. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Concussion Corner.